Bikers mock a lone woman at night, her identity shocks everyone around them. The deserted city streets stretched into the night, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. Diana Monroe walked alone, her footsteps echoing off the pavement. She kept her head down, her posture reserved, her modest clothing blending into the shadows. In the distance, the rumble of engines grew louder. A notorious biker gang, the Black Vultures, rounded the corner, their sleek machines gleaming under the streetlights. They spotted Diana and exchanged knowing glances, revving their engines as they approached. Diana kept walking, her pace steady, her eyes fixed on the ground. The gang encircled her, their bikes blocking her path, their laughter filling the air. They were confident, arrogant, certain that this helpless woman had nowhere to run. George "Crusher" Vance, the gang's leader, brought his bike alongside her. He leaned in close, his breath hot on her neck. Well, he drawled. What do we have here? A little lost lamb, all alone in the big bad city. Diana didn't respond. She kept her eyes down, her hands clasped in front of her. Crusher reached out, his fingers grazing her arm. Don't be shy, sweetheart. We're just looking for a little fun. Diana's head snapped up, her eyes locking with his. In that moment, something shifted. A look of quiet authority, a glimmer of power that sent a shiver down Crusher's spine. He pulled his hand back, suddenly uncertain. The other gang members fell silent, watching the exchange with growing unease. Diana spoke, her voice calm and clear. I suggest you move along, gentlemen. I have no quarrel with you, but I will not hesitate to defend myself if necessary. Crusher laughed, but there was an edge to it now. You've got spunk, I'll give you that. But you're outnumbered here. What makes you think you can take us all on? Diana smiled, a small, knowing smile. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The bikers exchanged glances, their bravado faltering in the face of Diana's quiet confidence. Crusher revved his engine, trying to regain control of the situation. Listen, lady, he growled. I don't care who you think you are. This is our turf, and we make the rules around here. Diana raised an eyebrow. Your turf? I think you'll find that this city belongs to many people, not just those who choose to intimidate others. A bystander, hidden in the shadows of a nearby alley, watched the confrontation with growing disbelief. He recognized Diana, knew her face from the news and the gossip columns. She wasn't just anyone, she was Diana Monroe, the elusive billionaire CEO of Monroe Industries, a company that owned half the city. The bystander fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed a number. You're not going to believe this, he whispered urgently. The Black Vultures have cornered Diana Monroe. They have no idea who she is. On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath. Diana Monroe? Are you certain? Positive. I'm looking right at her. Stay where you are. I'm sending reinforcements. Don't let her out of your sight. The bystander ended the call, his heart pounding. He watched as Crusher leaned in closer to Diana, his face twisted in a sneer. I'm getting tired of this game, Crusher said. You've got two choices here. Either you come with us quietly, or we make this a lot more difficult than it needs to be. Diana's eyes flashed with anger. I don't respond well to threats, Mr. Vance. I suggest you reconsider your approach. Crusher's eyes widened. How do you know my name? Diana smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. I know a great deal about you, George. More than you could possibly imagine. Now, I'll say this one last time. Move along, before you make a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. Crusher's face reddened with anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman. He revved his engine again, the sound echoing off the buildings. You've got a big mouth, lady, he snarled. But you're outnumbered and outgunned. You really think you can take on the whole Black Vultures gang? Diana's smile didn't waver. I don't need to take on your entire gang, Mr. Vance. I only need to make an example of you. She reached into her pocket and the bikers tensed, expecting her to pull out a weapon. But instead, she withdrew a small, sleek phone. She tapped the screen, and suddenly, the street was filled with the sound of sirens. The bikers looked around, confusion and fear dawning on their faces. They knew those sirens, knew what they meant. The police were coming, and they were coming fast. Crusher turned back to Diana, his eyes wide with shock. "What did you do?" Diana held up her phone. "I made a call. You see, I have a direct line to the chief of police. He's a personal friend of mine. And he's very interested in your activities, Mr. Vance." Panic spread through the gang like wildfire. Some of the bikers revved their engines, ready to flee. Others looked to Crusher for guidance, unsure of what to do. Crusher himself seemed frozen, his eyes locked on Diana. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had underestimated her, had mistaken her quiet demeanor for weakness. And now, he was paying the price. Diana took a step forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "This is your last chance, Mr. Vance. Call off your men and leave this city. If you don't, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy you and your gang. And believe me, I have more resources than you could possibly imagine." Crusher swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He looked at his men, saw the fear in their eyes. He knew he had lost. He had no choice but to retreat. The sound of sirens grew louder, the flashing lights of police cars appearing at the end of the street. The black vultures scattered, their engines roaring as they fled into the night. Crusher hesitated for a moment, his eyes locked on Diana. "This isn't over," he growled. "You think you've won, but you don't know who you're messing with." Diana smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "On the contrary, Mr. Vance. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A small-time thug with delusions of grandeur. You're nothing to me, just another obstacle to be removed." Crusher's face twisted with rage, but he knew he was beaten. He revved his engine and sped away, disappearing into the darkness. Diana watched him go, her posture relaxed, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. The black vultures were just one of many challenges she faced, one of many enemies who sought to bring her down. But Diana was no ordinary woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, a power player in a city full of sharks. She had built her empire through sheer determination and intellect, had risen from nothing to become one of the most influential people in the world. And she wasn't about to let a gang of thugs stand in her way. As the police cars pulled up, Diana turned to face them, her head held high. She knew the chief of police would have questions, would want to know what had happened. But she was ready, had already prepared her statement. She was Diana Monroe, after all. She was always prepared, always one step ahead of the game. The bystander watched from the shadows, his heart still pounding with adrenaline. He had witnessed something extraordinary, had seen the true power of Diana Monroe in action. And he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. That Diana's story was far from over, and that the city would never be the same again. In the days that followed, the story of Diana's confrontation with the black vultures spread like wildfire. The media descended on the city, eager to get a glimpse of the elusive billionaire who had single-handedly taken down a notorious biker gang. But Diana remained as enigmatic as ever, refusing to give interviews or comment on the incident. She went about her business as usual, attending board meetings and charity events, her head held high, her demeanor as cool and collected as ever. Behind closed doors, however, Diana knew that the incident with the black vultures was just the tip of the iceberg. She had made enemies over the years, had stepped on toes and ruffled feathers in her rise to the top. And now, those enemies were circling, looking for any weakness, any opportunity to bring her down. One of those enemies was Marcus Sloan, a rival businessman with a grudge against Diana that went back years. He had been waiting for an opportunity to strike, and the incident with the black vultures had given him just the opening he needed. Sloan had connections to the criminal underworld, had his fingers in many pies. He knew that Crusher and his gang were just pawns in a much larger game, and he intended to use them to his advantage. He reached out to Crusher, offering him a deal. In exchange for information on Diana's activities and vulnerabilities, Sloane would provide the gang with money, weapons, and protection from the law. Crusher was hesitant at first, his pride still stinging from his defeat at Diana's hands. But the lure of power and wealth was too strong to resist. He agreed to Sloane's terms, and the two men began to plot their next move. Meanwhile, Diana was not oblivious to the growing threat. She had eyes and ears everywhere, had informants in every corner of the city. She knew that Sloane was up to something, and she was determined to stop him before he could make his move. The stage was set for a confrontation that would rock the city to its core, a battle between two titans of industry with the fate of millions hanging in the balance. As the tension between Diana and Sloane escalated, the city itself began to feel the effects. The once thriving downtown area became a ghost town, with businesses shuttering their doors and residents fleeing for safer pastures. But amidst the chaos and uncertainty, there were those who refused to give up hope. One of those people was Maria Hernandez, a community organizer who had been working tirelessly to improve the lives of the city's most vulnerable residents. Maria had seen firsthand the impact that poverty and crime could have on a community, had watched as families struggled to make ends meet and children fell through the cracks of a broken system. She knew that the only way to create real change was to bring people together, to build a sense of unity and purpose that could overcome even the greatest of challenges. And so, she began to organize. She reached out to local leaders and activists, brought them together to share ideas and resources. She organized rallies and protests, gave speeches and interviews, anything to get the word out that there was still hope for the city, still a chance to build a better future. At first, progress was slow. Many people were too afraid to get involved, too cynical to believe that anything could really change. But Maria persevered, her passion and commitment inspiring others to join her cause. Slowly but surely, the community began to come together. Neighbors started looking out for one another, started working together to clean up the streets and create safe spaces for children to play. Small businesses began to reopen, new ones started to spring up, filling empty storefronts and bringing life back to the once desolate downtown. And at the center of it all was Maria, a beacon of hope and resilience in a city that had lost its way. She knew that the fight was far from over, that there would be more challenges and setbacks along the way. But she also knew that together, they could overcome anything, could build a city that was stronger, more just, and more compassionate than ever before. As the community began to come together, Diana took notice. She had always been a firm believer in the power of unity, had seen firsthand how even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outwards and create real change. She reached out to Maria, offered her support and resources. At first, Maria was hesitant, unsure of whether she could trust a woman with such wealth and power. But as they began to talk, she realized that Diana was different, that she truly cared about the city and its people. Together, they began to plan, to strategize ways to use Diana's influence and resources to support the community's efforts. They set up a foundation, the Monroe Hernandez Community Fund, dedicated to providing grants and support to local organizations and initiatives. They also began to work on larger projects, such as a community center that would provide a safe space for youth to gather and learn, and a job training program that would help people develop the skills they needed to find stable, well-paying employment. As news of their efforts spread, more and more people began to get involved. Volunteers from all walks of life came together to help build the community center, to mentor youth and teach classes. Local businesses pledged their support, donating goods and services to help make the projects a reality. And slowly but surely, the city began to transform. The streets became cleaner, safer, more vibrant. People began to feel a sense of pride and ownership in their community, a sense that they had the power to create real change. But even as the community celebrated its successes, Diana knew that the fight was far from over. Sloane and his allies were still out there, still plotting and scheming. And she knew that they would stop at nothing to bring her down, to destroy everything she and Maria had worked so hard to build. She steeled herself for the battles to come, knowing that the fate of the city rested on her shoulders. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she had the strength and support of an entire community behind her. And together, they would prevail. As Diana and Maria's efforts began to bear fruit, Sloane grew increasingly frustrated. He had underestimated Diana's resourcefulness, had failed to anticipate the groundswell of support she would receive from the community. He knew that he needed to act fast, to strike a decisive blow before Diana's influence became too great to overcome. And so, he turned to his criminal allies, to the gangs and thugs who had long operated in the shadows of the city. He offered them money, power, protection, anything they wanted in exchange for their loyalty. And slowly but surely, he began to build an army, a force that could rival even the might of Diana Monroe. But even as Sloane plotted and schemed, the community continued to come together. They organized neighborhood watch groups, worked with local law enforcement to keep the streets safe. They created after-school programs and job training initiatives, gave people the tools and support they needed to build better lives for themselves and their families. And at the center of it all were Diana and Maria, two women from vastly different backgrounds who had found common ground in their love for the city and its people. They worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts and souls into every project, every initiative. But even as they celebrated their successes, they knew that the danger was far from over. They had heard whispers of Sloane's growing power, had seen the signs of his influence spreading like a cancer through the city. They knew that they needed to be prepared, to have a plan in place for when the inevitable confrontation came. And so, they began to strategize, to gather allies and resources, to build a network of support that could withstand even the fiercest of attacks. As the city held its breath, waiting for the storm to break, Diana and Maria stood tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew that the road would be long and hard, that there would be setbacks and obstacles at every turn. But they also knew that together, they could overcome anything, could build a city that was truly worthy of its people. As the tension between Diana and Sloane reached a boiling point, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. The streets were quiet, the air thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew that something big was about to happen. And then, one fateful night, it did. Sloane made his move, launching a coordinated attack on the community center that Diana and Maria had worked so hard to build. His thugs stormed the building, smashing windows and setting fires, while his hackers worked to drain the foundation's accounts and destroy its records. But Diana and Maria were ready. They had anticipated Sloane's move, had put in place a network of safeguards and contingency plans. As soon as the attack began, they sprang into action, mobilizing their allies and resources to contain the damage and protect the people inside. The battle raged through the night, with Diana and Maria's forces clashing with Sloane's in a desperate struggle for control of the city. But even as the flames burned and the bullets flew, the community refused to give in to fear. They came together, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming friends in the face of a common enemy. They formed human chains to evacuate the injured, worked together to put out the fires and clean up the debris. And as the sun rose over the smoking ruins of the community center, Diana and Maria emerged triumphant. They had beaten back Sloane's attack, had shown the city that hope and unity were stronger than fear and hate. In the aftermath of the battle, the city began to heal. The community center was rebuilt, bigger and better than ever, a testament to the resilience and determination of its people. Diana and Maria worked tirelessly to support the recovery efforts, pouring their resources into rebuilding homes and businesses, providing food and shelter to those who had lost everything. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that together, they could overcome anything. As the weeks turned into months, the city began to thrive once more. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and music, with the bustle of commerce and the chatter of friends. People began to feel a sense of pride and ownership in their community, a sense that they had the power to shape their own destinies. And at the center of it all were Diana and Maria, two women who had started as adversaries but had become the closest of friends. They had learned to trust and rely on each other, to draw strength from their shared commitment to the city and its people. But even as they celebrated their victories, they knew that the fight was far from over. Sloane was still out there, still plotting his revenge, and there would always be those who sought to prey on the vulnerable and the weak. But Diana and Maria were ready. They had built a community that was strong and united, a community that could weather any storm. And they knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they had the love and support of their people, there was nothing they could not achieve. As the city continued to heal and grow, Diana knew that the time had come to confront Sloane once and for all. She had learned the hard way that he would never stop, that he would always be a threat to the people she had sworn to protect. And so, she began to plan, to gather her allies and resources for one final battle. She reached out to the leaders of other cities, to the heads of powerful corporations and foundations, anyone who could help her bring Sloane to justice. At first, progress was slow. Many were hesitant to get involved, afraid of the repercussions of crossing a man as powerful and ruthless as Marcus Sloane. But Diana persevered, her passion and commitment winning them over one by one. And then, finally, the day came. Diana and her allies descended on Sloane's headquarters, armed with evidence of his crimes and the support of the entire city behind them. Sloane was caught off guard, his defenses crumbling in the face of such overwhelming force. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender, to face the consequences of his actions. He was arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, from racketeering to murder to treason. And as he was led away in handcuffs, the city erupted in celebration, the streets filled with cheering crowds and impromptu parades. Diana watched it all with a sense of pride and satisfaction, knowing that she had helped to make it happen. But she also knew that the work was far from over, that there would always be more battles to fight and more challenges to overcome. But she was ready. She had the strength of her convictions, the support of her friends and allies, and the love of a city that had become her home. And together, they would continue to build a better future, one day at a time. In the weeks and months that followed, Diana and Maria worked tirelessly to build on the momentum of their victory. They knew that the city had been through a lot, that there were still many challenges ahead, but they also knew that they had the power to make a real difference. They started by focusing on the most pressing needs of the community, working to provide food and shelter to those who had been displaced by the violence, to create jobs and opportunities for those who had lost everything. They partnered with local organizations and businesses, leveraging their resources and expertise to create real, lasting change. But they also knew that true transformation would require more than just material support. They needed to address the root causes of the city's problems, to create a culture of empathy, compassion, and mutual understanding. And so, they started small, with simple acts of kindness and generosity. They organized community events and block parties, brought people together to share food and stories and laughter. They created mentorship programs and skill-sharing workshops, gave people the tools and support they needed to build better lives for themselves and their families. And slowly but surely, the city began to transform. People started to look out for each other, to see their neighbors not as strangers but as friends and allies. They started to take pride in their community, to work together to create the kind of city they wanted to live in. And as Diana looked out over the city she loved, she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but she also knew that they had the strength and the vision to face them head-on. She took Maria's hand in hers, a symbol of the unbreakable bond they had forged through adversity and triumph. And together, they set out to build a better world, one small act of kindness at a time. As the years passed, Diana and Maria's vision for the city began to take shape. The community center had become the heart of the city, a bustling hub of activity and innovation where people from all walks of life could come together to learn, grow, and thrive. The job training programs they had started had blossomed into a thriving network of businesses and entrepreneurs, creating new opportunities and pathways to success for countless individuals and families. The streets were clean and safe, the air filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting. But perhaps the most profound change was the one that had taken place within the hearts and minds of the people themselves. They had learned to see each other not as rivals or enemies, but as fellow travelers on the journey of life. They had learned to listen to each other's stories, to empathize with each other's struggles, to celebrate each other's triumphs. And at the center of it all were Diana and Maria, the two women who had started it all. They had become more than just leaders or activists. They had become the very embodiment of hope and resilience, the living proof that change was possible if you had the courage to fight for it. As they stood together on the balcony of the community center, looking out over the city they had helped to build, Diana felt a sense of deep gratitude and humility wash over her. She knew that none of this would have been possible without the love and support of the people around her, without the countless small acts of kindness and generosity that had transformed the world one moment at a time. She turned to Maria, her eyes shining with tears of joy and pride. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We really did it." Maria smiled, her own eyes brimming with tears. "No," she said softly, taking Diana's hand in hers. "We all did it. Together." And so, the story of Diana Monroe and the city she helped to transform came to an end. But in truth, it was only the beginning. For the legacy they had created would live on, would continue to inspire and uplift generations to come. The community center would remain a beacon of hope and possibility, a testament to the power of unity and compassion in the face of adversity. The businesses and organizations they had helped to create would continue to thrive, would provide livelihoods and opportunities for countless individuals and families. And the culture of empathy and understanding they had fostered would endure, would become the very fabric of the city itself. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of all was the one that lived on in the hearts and minds of the people who had been touched by their story. For they had learned that true strength lay not in wealth or power, but in the bonds of love and friendship that held them together. They had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness could have a ripple effect, could change the course of history in ways that could never be predicted or controlled. And they had learned that hope was not just a feeling, but a choice, a decision to keep moving forward even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As Diana and Maria looked out over the city they had helped to build, they knew that their work was far from over. There would always be more challenges to face, more battles to fight, more hearts to heal. But they also knew that they had the strength and the courage to face whatever lay ahead, that they had the love and support of a community that would always stand by their side. And so, hand in hand, they stepped forward into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to build a world that was truly worthy of the hopes and dreams of all who called it home. For in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the accolades or the achievements, but the lives they had touched, the hearts they had healed, the world they had helped to make a little bit brighter, one small act of kindness at a time.